What makes someone truly loyal? Is it fear, power, or is it the choice to follow someone even when you don't have to? In solo leveling, Sung Jin-Woo commands an army of terrifying shadows. Some are monsters, some are kings, some were once his enemies. But among all of them, one soldier stands apart, a knight who doesn't need to speak, a warrior who doesn't ask for rewards, a soldier who simply kneels and waits for his king's command. His name is Igris, and his loyalty to Sung Jin-Woo may be unlike anything else in the entire series. When Jin-Woo first encounters Igris, he isn't a loyal soldier, he's an obstacle, a powerful knight standing between Jin-Woo and the next stage of his journey. Igris is silent, cold, and incredibly disciplined. Unlike many enemies Jin-Woo has faced, Igris doesn't fight like a mindless monster, he fights like a knight. Every movement is calculated, every attack has purpose, and despite Jin-Woo's growing strength, Igris pushes him to his limit. But this battle is about more than winning. For Jin-Woo, Igris represents something important, a challenge worthy of respect. Jin-Woo doesn't simply defeat Igris, he earns him. After the battle, Jin-Woo uses his shadow extraction ability, and that's when everything changes. The warrior who once stood against him rises again, but this time he kneels. Igris becomes one of Jin-Woo's shadows, and from that moment forward, something remarkable begins. Igris doesn't simply follow orders, he serves. There's a difference. Many of Jin-Woo's shadows are terrifying because of their personalities. Beru is enthusiastic, Iron is chaotic, Tusk is powerful, but Igris is different. He's disciplined, quiet, respectful. He doesn't constantly demand attention, he doesn't need praise, he doesn't need to prove that he's the strongest. His entire identity becomes centered around one thing: serving his king. And that's what makes Igris so fascinating. His loyalty isn't loud, it's silent. You don't need Igris to announce that he'll protect Jin-Woo. You already know, because every time his king is threatened, Igris stands between him and danger. There's also something symbolic about his appearance. He's a knight, and Jin-Woo isn't simply his master, he's his king. Igris treats their relationship almost like a medieval knight serving a ruler. He bows, he obeys, he protects, and he carries himself with an almost perfect sense of honor. Even after becoming a shadow, that identity remains. But here's the interesting part. Igris was once an enemy. Jin-Woo didn't know him, they weren't friends, they didn't share a childhood, there was no history between them. Their relationship began with a battle. Yet somehow that relationship developed into one of the strongest bonds in Jin-Woo's army. Why? Because Jin-Woo gave Igris something important: respect. Jin-Woo didn't treat Igris like a disposable monster. He recognized his strength, he recognized his skill, and after defeating him, he gave him a second purpose. Igris was no longer a guardian of a dungeon, he became a guardian of Jin-Woo. And over time, Igris becomes more than just another shadow. He becomes part of Jin-Woo's journey. From the early days when Jin-Woo is still discovering his powers, to the moments when his army becomes powerful enough to overwhelm entire armies, Igris remains there, quietly standing behind him, waiting, watching, ready. That's what makes his loyalty so powerful. Igris doesn't need to understand everything Jin-Woo does. He doesn't question every decision. He simply trusts his king, and that trust becomes especially meaningful as Jin-Woo's enemies become stronger. Because the stronger Jin-Woo becomes, the more dangerous his enemies become. Yet Igris never hesitates. Think about how far Igris has come. He started as a mysterious knight, a boss standing between Jin-Woo and his goal. He was defeated, then resurrected, then transformed into a shadow, and eventually became one of the most recognizable members of Jin-Woo's army. That's not just a power progression, it's a relationship progression. Igris also represents Jin-Woo himself. At the beginning of solo leveling, Jin-Woo is weak. He is constantly underestimated. People see him as nothing more than the weakest hunter, but slowly he changes. He becomes stronger, more confident, more intimidating, and eventually he becomes the Shadow Monarch. Igris experiences that transformation alongside him. The knight who once tested Jin-Woo's strength eventually becomes one of the warriors standing beside the strongest being in the world. And perhaps that's why Igris feels different from the others. Beru became loyal because he was overwhelmed by Jin-Woo's power. Others followed because they were summoned, but Igris feels like he represents something deeper: honor, duty, respect. The idea that a true knight doesn't abandon his king. Even when Igris doesn't say a word, his actions speak for him. He doesn't need a dramatic speech. He doesn't need to explain his feelings. The way he kneels tells you everything. The way he fights tells you everything. The way he protects Jin-Woo tells you everything. And maybe that's the greatest reason fans love him. Igris is the perfect example of show, don't tell. He doesn't tell us he's loyal, he shows us, again and again and again. But there's something even more beautiful about their relationship. Jin-Woo started his journey alone. Nobody believed in him. Nobody expected him to become powerful. He was the weakest hunter, the one everyone underestimated. But eventually he built an army. Not just an army of monsters, an army of warriors who would follow him anywhere. And standing at the front of that army was Igris, the first great shadow warrior to become a symbol of Jin-Woo's growing power. Igris isn't the loudest, he isn't necessarily the funniest, he isn't the most terrifying, but he may be the purest representation of loyalty in solo leveling, because when everyone else sees the Shadow Monarch, Igris sees his king, and when Jin-Woo commands, Igris doesn't hesitate. He simply bows, then rises, and fights. That's why Igris is Sung Jin-Woo's most loyal soldier. Not because he's forced to serve, not because he needs recognition, not because he wants power, but because his entire existence has become a promise to protect the man who gave him a second purpose, a promise to stand beside his king until the very end. And perhaps that's what makes Igris so unforgettable. He began as the knight Jin-Woo had to defeat, but somewhere along the way, he became the knight who would never leave his side. And that's the story of Igris.